Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Week 13, rivalry week of the college football season is behind us. Week 12 of the NFL season in the books. Here at Saturday Sunday, so much to break down as we now push our way towards championship week in college football season to try to set the stage for the playoffs and everything that is on the horizon with the playoffs, bowl season, pre-draft season, so much to discuss. So let's jump right in it. Let's start with the NFL draft report for this week. First string quarterback of the week, a familiar name of recent, Jayden Daniels, 16 of 24, 235 yards and 4 touchdowns, throwing another 120 yards on the ground. LSU big win over Texas A&M. The first string running back of the week, Audric Estime out of Notre Dame, 238 yards and 4 touchdowns. The physical inside runner. He has had a fantastic season. We've talked about him multiple times here at Saturday, Sunday on the teams of the week. Estime is now, I think, put himself in position to be potentially a top 100 pick. He's put himself in the mix there after the top 4 running backs. I think he could be in the top 5, top 7 in this class. We'll see how many of those guys can go on day 2. I don't think any of them are round 1 or early round 2 guys, but I think some of these running backs will find their way into round 3 and then a bunch in the early portion of round 4. The first string wide receiver of the week, another familiar name here, Rome Odunze. Washington was victorious over Washington State. Odunze had 7 catches, 120 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then the first string tight end of the week out of Penn State, Theo Johnson, 4 catches, 59 yards, and a touchdown. He might not be at the top of the tight end board in that like top 3 to top 5 range, but I think Theo Johnson has been an intriguing player for some time in college football. I think the NFL is going to be intrigued with him. I could see him being either a potential surprise late round 3 pick or early round 4 pick. And don't think just because he might not be a guy that's been on our radar. Listen, Luke Schoonmaker went in the second round. Brenton Strange went in the second round. So what the NFL is looking for at the tight end position sometimes is different than maybe what the draft Twitter or Devy Twitter is ready to kind of jump on board with. Theo Johnson is a guy who has the athletic makeup, has been a guy that's been regarded highly. So I could see an NFL team being fans of Theo Johnson. If we take this to the second string team of the week at the quarterback position, it is Bo Nix out of Oregon, 367 yards and 2 touchdowns in a win over Oregon State. Bo Nix continues to put together a really strong statistical year. It's going to be really interesting. I think he's one of the hardest QB evals in terms of what is the NFL going to think of him. Obviously a guy who, once upon a time, he was at Auburn, very inconsistent accuracy, ball placement, decision-making. He's cleaned that up for the most part at Oregon. Has had a really strong finish to his career. Is Bo Nix a guy that's looked at as a round 1 caliber prospect, or is he a guy more on day 2? I lean more towards day 2, but I could see the NFL being intrigued with him potentially as a round 1 guy. Second string running back of the week, I'm going to Trey Benson out of Florida State. Obviously, with Jordan Travis on the shelf, the run game is now paramount. He had 19 carries, 95 yards, and he found the end zone 3 times against the Florida Gators to help Florida State stay undefeated with their victory over Florida this past week. I think Trey Benson is very much in the mix to be RB1 in this class. I don't think it's going to be top 50, but I think he's got a real chance to be the RB1 in the 2024 NFL draft. Second string wide receiver of the week, going back to Marvin Harrison Jr. in that Ohio State-Michigan game. Listen, we know Michigan's got a really great defense. Marvin Harrison is the reason why Ohio State, I think, stayed competitive in that game. 5 catches, 118 yards, and 1 touchdown. The big playability that he offers, the attention that he draws is paramount to Ohio State's offense, and we saw him make a big impact in that game. Obviously, Michigan came away victorious. And then the second string tight end of the week, staying in that Ohio State-Michigan game, Cade Stover out of Ohio State, 3 catches, 42 yards. But again, I'll continue to say, Cade Stover has seen his stock really elevate this year. A guy who I thought maybe was around 4-ish guy before the year started. I think Cade Stover now is squarely in the day 2 mix as maybe one of the best all-around tight end prospects in the 2024 NFL draft class. His blocking, his ability to play inline, soft hands, can be a receiver, can be a red zone weapon. Cade Stover has done a lot this year to really help his cause. Some other draft-eligible guys that I thought stood out this week that I wanted to make note of. Joe Milton out of Tennessee, 383 yards, 4 touchdowns, the quarterback. But the big story is he's announced that he's planning on staying back in college. So he'll be back next year. I think that's like his 5th or 6th year. But, the redshirt COVID year, he's come back for another year there. So we'll see, there were things of his game that are really intriguing. We know the elite arm talent and the, velocity and strength. Can he clean it up a little bit to maybe be a more highly regarded prospect in the 2025 NFL draft? J.J. McCarthy, again, we talked about him last week. Didn't see a lot in that Penn State game. Obviously, in the Michigan game, they asked him to do a little bit. In the Ohio State game, they asked him to do a little bit more. 16 of 20, 148 yards and 1 touchdown. Still not putting together that gaudy statistical, production. I still have my question marks. I've said that a lot of people I respect tremendously have him as a round 1 guy. I'm not there yet, but I know he's got arms. I know he's got, arm talent. I know he's got strength and velocity. I know he's got athleticism. I just haven't seen him face a lot of adversity. He's had pristine conditions at Michigan, great O-line, great run game, good receivers, great defense. I just don't know if he's a guy you can come in a team in the top 10. Like, think about the Giants. Think about the Jets. Think about, if the Bears are ready to move on from Justin Fields. You put J.J. McCarthy in a situation that's not pristine. Are we sure he's going to be, an elite level quarterback? Because I don't see that. I don't see the ability to carry a team on his back. I continue to say I see a prospect that's more on the caliber of Mac Jones and Kenny Pickett, Daniel Jones. And when those teams have reached for those guys, we've seen what's kind of happened there. So he had one incredible throw this past weekend. He thread the needle. It was an amazing throw. It was arguably the best throw I've ever seen J.J. McCarthy make. I want to see more of them down the stretch of this season before I think, and I want to see him face some adversity. Down 9 and needs a touchdown and a field goal late in the game. Down 14, can he bring his team back? I feel like I need to see more of that from J.J. McCarthy. Drake Maye this past week, UNC lost to NC State. He had 106 yards rushing and a touchdown, and then 254 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Listen, Maye's going to put a lot on his plate. We're going to see the good and the bad at times when he tries to carry this UNC offense. I continue to say the skill set, the traits, the talent remind me so much of Justin Herbert when he was in college. I don't think Drake Maye's getting past the 2nd pick in the draft. If Caleb Williams is going 1, I think Drake Maye some way, somehow will be the 2nd pick in the draft. Michael Penix Jr., I talked about Rome Odunze before. 18 of 33, 204 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception. His elite statistical production has came back to the pack a little bit here down the home stretch as the quality of defenses have improved. Listen, I like Michael Penix. There's a lot to like about his game. But similar to Bo Nix, similar to J.J. McCarthy, I think these guys are round 2 guys. Round 2, maybe they develop into a starter, give a shot. I don't see top 10, top 15. I think if you start pushing them up into that mix, it's a lot of the Daniel Jones, the Pickett, the Mac Jones, right? Those are the things that I talk about. I don't see these special traits and talents. Like, I understood, even though I didn't agree with it, there were things about Zach Wilson in terms of his traits that were intriguing. Trey Lance, I was a fan of. The traits screamed top 5 quarterback. None of the traits on a guy like Nix or McCarthy or Michael Penix, to me, are on a level of a guy like either Zach Wilson or Trey Lance. Doesn't mean they're not better quarterback prospects, because maybe they are. But I think teams got to start being more careful and more diligent in terms of picking their quarterbacks in round 1, because you want that. The bar's got to be high. They got to be a guy who can take over a game. You want to be able to, these guys to compete with the Patrick Mahomeses, the Josh Allens, the Lamar Jacksons, the Jalen Hurts. Because if you're not striving for that, you're probably going to be left behind in terms of the NFL landscape. Some other running backs I want to make note of: Blake Corum in that Ohio State game, 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mentioned Trey Benson before, I think is RB1. I think Trey Benson is right there in the mix, anywhere between RB1 and RB4, somewhere on day 2. I mentioned him, I think it was last week or the week before. Missouri running back Cody Schrader is a guy I'm going to be intrigued with to see where he ends up in the All-Star circuit. 217 more yards and a touchdown. He is putting together an elite statistical season. So I think he's a guy that we could see at one of those all-star settings. Obviously, now the junior's in the mix too, but I think we're going to see Schrader at one of the all-star games for sure. Kendall Milton out of Georgia. Once upon a time, he was thought of a highly regarded, recruit. 156 yards and 2 touchdowns. Another guy, I think the traits, the size, the straight line speed. Milton's going to intrigue some teams. I think we're looking at a guy somewhere on day 3, maybe in that round 5, round 6 mix for Kendall Milton. Some other wide receivers, obviously my wide receiver 2, Malik Nabers, continues to shine with Jayden Daniels, 122 yards and 2 touchdowns. His running mate there, Brian Thomas Jr., another touchdown. Listen, I think Nabers is going top 15, top 10. I think Brian Thomas Jr.'s got a real chance at slipping into the back portion of round 1, if not the early portion of round 2. Michigan's number 1 wide receiver, senior Roman Wilson, 3 catches, 36 yards, and a touchdown. He's up to 11 touchdowns for the year. So while Michigan doesn't put up those gaudy passing production numbers, Wilson has found the end zone 11 times. He's going to be one of the more highly regarded senior prospects. Xavier Worthy, 4 catches, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Listen, I feel like some people have soured a little bit on Xavier Worthy, but his speed and his ability to create separation, I think Xavier Worthy's got a real shot to go late round 1 or the early portion of round 2 as well, because teams want that game-breaking speed, and I think Xavier Worthy offers that. I've compared him for many years to Hollywood Brown. I think that's the comp that I like best with him. I think he can bring a lot similar skill sets to an offense similar to Hollywood Brown has at the NFL level. If we take this over to the Devy Slant, a couple guys I wanted to stand out that I wanted to talk about. The Penn State running back duo. We haven't checked in on them in a while. Kaytron Allen and, Nicholas Singleton. Singleton had 118 yards rushing and a touchdown. Chipped in with 2 catches for big plays, 68 yards in the receiving. His running mate, Kaytron Allen, 137 yards rushing. I've talked about Jaden Ott. I think following Jaden Ott, I think the Penn State duo is probably number 2 and number 3 in terms of underclassmen, Devy running back prospects that are not draft eligible in the 2024 NFL draft. Tet McMillan, 11 catches, 266 yards, and a touchdown. Listen, the minute all these wide receivers declare, Nabers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Keon Coleman, Rome Odunze, Tet McMillan, is right there at the top of the wide receiver pecking order. We've talked about guys like Luther Burden, Tet McMillan right there, with Evan Stewart as the top Devy underclassmen wide receiver prospects in the country. Impressive performance with him this past weekend, 11 catches, 266 yards, and a touchdown. And what can I say more about Jalen Milroe out of Alabama? I've talked about him. He'd be the underclassman, non-draft eligible quarterback that I'd want to get on my roster right now. 259 yards, 2 touchdowns, the game-winning touchdown on 4th and goal from the 31-yard line. Perfect pass into the end zone. Also at 107 yards rushing. He's going to be that guy, very much that dual threat quarterback that I think we're going to see him constantly increase his draft stock. I think he eventually is going to be around one guy. Milroe is a guy that I don't think he's looked at the way some highly regarded underclassmen quarterback prospects have been in the past. Milroe is a guy I'd want to get on my roster now for sure. Before we spin this over to the NFL, I did want to kind of check in. Listen, everyone loves talking mock drafts. I think it's now time to kind of set the stage a little bit for where we are in terms of a rookie dynasty mock draft. A lot of people's fantasy football seasons have 2 weeks left. People start thinking about that draft order, right? especially if teams are not going to be in the playoffs. So I kind of put together what I think would be a round one. Excuse me. Round one Dynasty super flex or 2-quarterback rookie mock draft right now. A lot can change here. Obviously, this is more in a vacuum, a lot based on talent and stuff like that. Right now, to me, the 1.01 pick still got to be Caleb Williams. His combination, he's got the athleticism to be a factor on the ground game. I think he's got special arm talent. To me, he's the most highly regarded quarterback prospect coming out since I've been doing Saturday, Sunday. That's ahead of Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence didn't have the rushing upside of a Caleb Williams either. So he would be the 1.01 pick. But it's close because at 1.02, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. To me, he's the best wide receiver prospect since I've been doing Saturday, Sunday. And that includes some great prospects like Jamar Chase and others. At the 1.03, back to the quarterback, I have Drake Maye there. I think his draft capital is solidified in that 1.02 range in like the second pick in the NFL draft. He's got rushing upside as well, elite arm. So I think Drake Maye right there in the mix with Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison to be one of the first couple picks in any Dynasty rookie draft setting. At 1.04, this might be a little controversial to some, but not for me. Jayden Daniels, quarterback out of LSU. I think he's got a real shot to go in the top 5 of the NFL draft. And to be frankly honest with you, if he goes in the top 5 of the real NFL draft, I could see a scenario where he's right there with Caleb Williams and Drake Maye in the conversation of going right there with those guys or even ahead of those guys. He offers more rushing upside than Caleb Williams and Drake Maye. He's got a lot of Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts to his game. We've seen how dominant those guys are at the NFL level. So I think Jayden Daniels, if he's got the draft capital close to Drake Maye and Caleb Williams, I really think he could push his way into the mix there to potentially compete with Caleb Williams and Drake Maye to be arguably the first or second quarterback taken off the board in Dynasty rookie draft setting. At the 1.05 pick, I have Malik Nabers, wide receiver out of LSU, followed by at 1.06 and 1.07, 2 more wide receivers, Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State, and Odunze, wide receiver out of Washington. Listen, I've said it. Their talent level, to me, you can rearrange those 3 in any order, Nabers, Coleman, Odunze. Right now, I have them ranked in this rookie mock draft setting the same way I have them in terms of their overall talent ability. I think Nabers, Coleman, and Odunze are all going in the top 12 to 15 picks of the NFL draft. I think Coleman and Odunze are 2 of the more prototypical outside wide receivers that we've had in quite some time with Marvin Harrison. And then Nabers is that guy who's got inside-outside versatility. I think all of them in a normal year without Marvin Harrison could easily be the number 1 wide receiver in the class. So I think you're talking about give me all of those guys who I think are going to have great draft capital to be the focal points of a pass offense at the NFL level, have the upside to be a wide receiver 1 at the NFL level for their teams and for fantasy. So 5, 6, 7 there, Nabers, Coleman, Odunze, one after another. Next up for me, I went towards the tight end position. I think Brock Bowers is one of the best, if not the best, tight end prospect I've scouted. I'll put him right there with Kyle Pitts. I know Pitts hasn't panned out like we expected. Is it him? Is it the scheme? Is it the utilization by Atlanta? Brock Bowers is very much in the mold of Kyle Pitts. He's not going to, he's a great athlete, great pass catcher, not going to be asked to do a lot of blocking. He can block. He can hold his own a little bit better than I think Kyle Pitts, but his bread and butter is going to be the impact he makes in the pass game. we saw how high Kyle Pitts went in drafts. We even saw how high TJ Hawkinson went. Evan Ingram, David Njoku, OJ Howard. Brock Bowers is a better prospect than all of those guys, except maybe Kyle Pitts. I even falling to 8 seems a little far for a dynasty rookie mock draft. But right now I have Brock Bowers there at 8. I don't think he gets out of the top 15 of the NFL draft. So I think someone will pull the trigger there in the top 8. At number 9, I have Marvin Harrison Jr.'s teammate from wide receiver Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. Another guy that before the year started, most people had him as the number 2 wide receiver in the class. But Nabers, Coleman, and Odunze's production this year, and Egbuka being injured, and I feel like those guys have leapfrogged him a little bit. But we're talking about a guy in Egbuka that's a probably slam dunk round 1 pick. So he's going to have the draft capital. He's in the mix there. He's going to be probably the 5th wide receiver taken, but we'll see. So he'd be a guy that I would still feel more safe taking that with the upside and the floor ceiling combo that Egbuka would offer before I pivot to any of the other wide receivers, running backs, or quarterbacks. At number 10 and 11, I have 2 quarterbacks. Now, I'll say this. I think both these guys, Bo Nix at number 10 and J.J. McCartney at 11, 1.10 and 1.11, this is under the impression that I think the NFL is going to push these guys into the round 1 mix. And if they push these guys into the round 1 mix, I think in a super flex or 2 quarterback league setting, they would warrant going at the end of round 1. If they fall into day 2, Will Levis territory, Drew Lock territory, if they fall into that range, I think I'd be a little bit more intrigued with some of the running backs and, potentially another wide receiver ahead of them. But I think right now the writing seems to think that they have a real shot, especially McCarthy, and I think Nix is going to push his way there too at round 1. If they have round 1 NFL draft capital, I think they belong in the mix here in round 1 fantasy rookie mock draft here. And then at 12, to round out round 1, I have wide receiver out of Oregon, Troy Franklin. I think he's right now in the mix to be a late round 1, early round 2 wide receiver. Explosive player, ability to win vertically. I still think there's even more untapped upside if he can get a little bit stronger, fill out his frame a little bit better. He's got great size. He's got great length, body control, ball skills. If he can handle press and physicality a little bit better, and I think if he can kind of even just get up in that 190 range, 192 range, I think he's another guy that can push his way into round 1. And again, I'm going to always lean round 1 wide receiver over what I think is going to be either a late round 2 or probably more round 3 running backs. I don't think we're going to see a top 50 pick. So that's why in my top 12 here, I don't have any running backs. I'll talk about some guys that just missed in a second, but I don't think we're going to see. So if we're talking round 1 wide receivers or round 1 quarterbacks, I think, and an elite tight end prospect, I think those are the guys that should make up a round 1 dynasty rookie mock draft right now as we sit here on November 28th. Guys that just missed, I do have the running backs kind of coming into the mix here. Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Travion Henderson, Braylon Allen, Audric Estime. Those are the guys that would be on the just miss, because these running backs, if any of them end up in pristine landing spots and late round 2 draft capital, they probably get pushed into the mix here. Maybe even round 1, push somebody else out. But if these guys end up going in the round 3 range, where I kind of think the sweet spot for the top 5 running backs is going to be this year, they're probably going to be drafted in the situations that they're going to be looked at as guys who could handle a good workload, but they might be a part of a committee. There might be somebody else there right now that they're going to sit behind. So until we get more certainty about draft capital, it's hard for me to put Benson, Corum, Allen, Henderson in a round 1 of a super flex, rookie mock draft. If the quarterbacks were out of the mix here and I didn't have Nix and McCarthy in there, then I would see probably putting in a couple running backs there. But that's kind of where I sit right now with the super flex setting and those guys, I think, being taken in round 1. I just think they belong going over these running backs that are going to be added to the mix here, probably where there's another running back and they're going to be a part of a committee there like so many other teams. The other quarterback I had here is Michael Penix Jr. He's another guy that I think the NFL is going to look at him as more of day 2. So he'd be there in the mix here with these running backs for sure. A couple other guys that just missed. Obviously we'll see if Quinn Ewers comes out. He could be another quarterback in the mix. Carson Beck, if he had day 2 draft capital, he could be in the mix there. Donovan Edwards, if he declares out of Michigan, he'd be another another running back in the mix there. And then you still got these other wide receivers, right? Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell. I think those would be the next group of guys. So I kind of set the stage for where my top 12 was. And in that top 12, again, it had, 5 quarterbacks: Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, Jayden Daniels, Bo Nix, and J.J. McCarthy. And then I would say Michael Penix, Quinn Ewers, and Carson Beck waiting in the wings. It had 6 wide receivers with Marvin Harrison, Malik Nabers, Keon Coleman, Rome Odunze, Emeka Egbuka, and Troy Franklin. But let's not lose sight of the guys who are right there on the cusp, and that would be Brian Thomas. And that would be, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell. All of those guys, those guys could even push ahead of potentially of Troy Franklin and be in the mix there, especially Brian Thomas, especially Xavier Worthy. Tight end position, I don't think anyone was really knocking on the door. I think Jatavian Sanders would probably be more of a late second round rookie draft pick in this setting. It's a pretty stacked draft class there with these wide receivers, with a bunch of running backs probably kind of all huddling up in that, round 3 range. And then you talk about all these other quarterbacks, you're going to see some really good prospects fall to the late portion of round 2. For sure. So that's just kind of where it sits right now in terms of a little bit of a dynasty rookie mock draft. I know that always kind of excites people. That's kind of how I would see round 1 right now. And then like the next 12 or so guys that would probably make up round 2 in no particular order, just kind of talking through by position the next wave of guys that would be in the mix. If we take this to the NFL draft report for week 12, at the quarterback position, C.J. Stroud lost a game, almost had a chance again to lead him down the field. But again, every time I watch C.J. Stroud, I just come away impressed. 304 yards, 2 touchdowns. It's amazing to think that the AFC is absolutely loaded with quarterback prospects. And C.J. Stroud, I think, is already, I would probably put him at 6th. And you can make the case that natural pure passer, he might even be top 3 or top 4 in the AFC. And there's so many good quarterback prospects there. If people aren't valuing him in Dynasty as an elite an elite quarterback with high level, mid to high QB1 upside, I would be super aggressive because he's played better in the NFL than he ever did in college. Everything we saw in that Georgia game is translated. I just continue to come away more and more impressed with CJ Stroud. At the running back position, the one name I wanted to bring up is Keaton Mitchell, who's been getting a real opportunity with Baltimore, the speedster, the undrafted speedster. I was very intrigued with him. I had him as like a round 4 type draftable prospect, but he went undrafted this past week, 11 touches, about 80, almost 90 total yards. He continues to be a playmaker every time he touches the ball. And I think he's one of those guys that's going to settle in that 10 to 12 touches a week in a backfield, but they're going to be impactful touches that I think are going to be fantasy viable. Keaton Mitchell is a guy that I'd be very intrigued with. I'd want to get him on my team now in the dynasty setting. At the pass catchers, let's start with the tight end position. Luke Musgrave went on IR, so other day 2 tight end there, Tyler Kraft, got his opportunity. He scored a touchdown. Kraft is a guy who's really interesting player. I said Tucker Kraft, really interesting player that I thought was going to go round 2. He ended up going round 3. The only thing that kind of hurt his fantasy value is the fact that they took Luke Musgrave in the 2nd round. They took Tucker Kraft in the 3rd round. But he's a guy that, I thought he had a lot of similarities to Dallas Goedert. I know it's probably partially, the same school thing, but he was a really intriguing prospect. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how Musgrave, who I love, develops there, but Tucker Kraft, kind of waiting in the wings there and getting an opportunity maybe possibly as well. At the wide receiver position, it's amazing the amount of wide receivers that we could talk about every single week. Tank Dell, another impressive performance with CJ Stroud. We've been talking about him every week. Jayden Reed continues to be a versatile chess piece that I think is going to be real fantasy viable. His ability to get open, create space, win vertically, win underneath, intermediate route, play inside, play outside. Jayden Reed is a guy I'd want to get on my dynasty team now. Zay Flowers, 2 touchdowns this past week, 1 rushing, 1 receiving. But the 2 guys that really stood out this week was Rashee Rice for Kansas City and Jalin Hyatt for the Giants. Rashee Rice, 8 catches, 107 yards, and 1 touchdown. While KC's had a lot of inconsistencies in their wide receiver room, I think Rashee Rice has developed into the best of a very shaky group there. Sky Moore hasn't developed. Kadarius Toney hasn't developed. I think we're seeing slow development, but we're seeing Rashee Rice morphing into a guy who I think next year we're going to feel at least solid about one of the wide receivers in KC, and I think that's going to be Rashee Rice. And then Jalin Hyatt. Listen, the Giants right now are playing with Tommy DeVito. They won their 2nd game in a row. But Jalin Hyatt, 5 catches, 109 yards. He's showing a versatility to his game and a refinement to his game that I don't think many people thought he had. He's showing he had a really great move this week to make a defender miss and pick up yards after the catch. I don't think a lot of people thought he had yak ability in his game in terms of the footwork. We obviously knew he had straight line speed, but he has shown better footwork in terms of stop and start. He's shown the ability to win vertically down the field, but not only, in situations where he blows by a defender. He's shown the ability to go up and get it multiple times throughout this year. And then you combine that all into the fact that he has that elite speed. And if the Giants had a quarterback that could take advantage of it, we would have seen this wouldn't have been Jalin Hyatt's first 100-yard game. We possibly would have had 3 or 4 this year because there's been a lot of yards left on the field. I'm really excited about Jalin Hyatt's growth and development. Listen, I said I thought he could be a Will Fuller type. I think there's even a little bit more refinement to his game already than I think Will Fuller had. And I think he continues to show more development and refinement. He's another player I'd be very excited about. He's not putting together a very strong statistical year. Hyatt is one of those guys like Jayden Reed that I'd want to go get on my team now. Obviously, trading for Tank Dell now is not going to happen. Rashee Rice is going to be hard because he's attached to Patrick Mahomes. But I think Jalin Hyatt and Jayden Reed can be had, maybe for like a early to mid 2nd round rookie pick. I think you start comparing guys like Jalin Hyatt and Jayden Reed to, Brian Thomas Jr. and, guys like that, Xavier Worthy. I think you can make the case that they're right there with him. So a mid 2nd round pick might not even get you Brian Thomas Jr. or Xavier Worthy. So if I can turn a 2nd round rookie pick into Jalin Hyatt or Jayden Reed right now, I think I'd probably do that for sure. So there it is, guys. NFL draft report. Since we did the rookie mock draft there, we're going to skip out on the Dynasty fantasy report for this week. We kind of did that with the rookie mock draft. That was kind of our Dynasty thing for this week. There was no real glaring buys or sells, which I've been kind of sharing with you. I think what I'll do next week in the Dynasty section is kind of take a look at the top of the rankings boards. I think as we're going to the final stretch here of the NFL season, kind of re-looking at what does the top 5, top 10 of the quarterback Dynasty board look like. Same thing with the wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. So I think that's what we'll do next week in the Fantasy Dynasty report. Obviously, we'll check in on the rookies in the NFL rookie report, and then obviously the NFL draft report and the Devy Slant to continue to hone in and focus in on these draft eligible prospects for the 2024 NFL draft. If you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website. Check out our premium content tab for $9.99. You get access to all of our premium notebooks. You get the NFL scouting notebook, over 100 detailed player profiles. There will be more added to the mix for sure. Strengths, fundamental areas, developmental areas, how they win, NFL role, fantasy spin, draft projection. You get the rankings notebook, all our different rankings. And then in April, you get the draft projections notebook tab for every position, offense and defense. Over 400 players in that. Snapshot of how they win, projecting who we think goes off the board in round 1, who we think goes off the board in the first 3 rounds, and then a tab projecting who we think every single pick in the NFL draft will be. You get all of it for $9.99. Best way to help us continue to do what we do. If you can't purchase the premium content, please, wherever you listen to our podcast, rate, review, subscribe, download Get over to YouTube, subscribe there, check out the content, the video content there if you're someone who'd rather watch the podcast rather than listen to the audio feed of it. So, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, Dave Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.